It's Monday, the 31st of October. This is Politics Live. Joining me, Health Minister and Minister for Women, Maria Caulfield. Labour MP, Emma Hardy. Senior Associate Editor at the New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe. And the Chief Political Correspondent at The Sun, Natasha Clark. Today.
How big does the crisis need to get, Home Secretary?
Pressure grows on Suella Braverman over the migrant crisis and her own security breaches.
Rishi Sunak promised a government of integrity, professionalism and accountability. At the moment, we haven't got any of those things.
There's more to do, but we're making progress. But we've got to stop these people being exploited.
Will Rishi Sunak U-turn over his decision not to attend the United Nations Climate Change Summit, COP27? Also, preventing protesters from getting too close to abortion clinics. We'll ask the new Minister for Women why she's against buffer zones. And will younger people pay the price when the Chancellor announces his spending cuts? Welcome. Let's start with the story here in The Independent. You heard it in the headlines. Rishi Sunak could go to COP27 climate summit in major U-turn, says the minister. Prime Minister will go to Egypt if he has time. So, my opening question to the panel, starting with you, Maria, is will the Prime Minister change his mind and go to the United Nations Climate Change Conference after all?
I don't think it's a hard no. It's the timing of both events, because we know that we've got the fiscal announcement coming up on November 17th and COP finishes the day after that. And we know how vital it is that we get this fiscal statement right, because we've seen the impact of the mini-budget when, as Rishi has said himself, mistakes were made. So I think he's minded to go if he has time, but the fiscal statement has to be the absolute priority at the moment. We know the outcome when that's not done well, and that's his absolute priority right now.
Do you think he'll end up going?
Well, I think he's just showing that he's a little bit weak, isn't he? He's flip-flopping about and can't seem to make up his mind what he wants to do. Now, the UK is the president of COP27. It's our opportunity to really show leadership on this. I mean, one country is going to be the country that sort of wins on this climate change race and wins on green jobs. Why not the UK? And for it to be us, we need to have that strong leadership from the very beginning. So I think he should go and he should make his mind up and stop flipping about saying if he's got time or if he can fit it in his diary. He's the Prime Minister. I'm sure he can make time to attend if he wishes.
Is it not a priority?
Of course it is. And if you look at our track record in terms of, the reason why we're not experiencing some of the energy shortages that other countries in Europe are is because we have prioritised renewable energy. And because we have done that, we haven't been so reliant on Russian oil and gas. So we have led the way. And as Emma said, we were the president for last year's conference.
Well, this is the handover, isn't it?
This is the handover
in Egypt.
And the minister, Alex Sharma is going and will be handing over. But, we must not underestimate the importance of the fiscal announcements in November. And I think that is his absolute priority right now, because the impact on the day-to-day living of everyone
including rising energy prices,
yeah,
in fact. But has this anything to do with it, do you think, Rachel? In The Guardian, number 10 alarm as Boris Johnson plans to attend COP27 climate summit. It is the United Nations Climate Change Conference, we call it COP27. Do you think that has featured in perhaps now thinking about going?
Well, I think if the country that has the presidency, as the UK still does, doesn't send either their head of government or their head of state, because obviously the King has been told not to attend, then there is an opportunity for a former Prime Minister to sweep in and steal Rishi Sunak's thunder. But that is because the absence of those two figures is showing an absence of leadership. And of course, there's a space, there's an opportunity for attention. It's quite expected that Boris Johnson might try and capitalise on that. I think Rishi Sunak probably will end up going, if only for part of it, simply because it just looks very odd for one of the leading nations in the global economy and on the fight for climate change just not to have any presence there whatsoever, especially as he's demoted the COP Minister Alex Sharma from a cabinet role. So it's not really great if you're trying to say, oh, we're making climate change a key priority, but here are all the decisions that we've made that actually show the opposite.
What decisions should he make, Natasha?
I think he should go. You know, I think it does show leadership on the world stage. Obviously, you know, it was Boris's baby last year. You know, we were talking about COP26, you know, for weeks up. You know, it was a historic moment for us to host it. I think he should. But equally, you know, it can't be the priority at the moment when, you know, families are facing a cost of living crisis. We're facing, you know, rising energy bills. We're facing rising interest rates and mortgages, and everybody is rightly worried about that. It's understandable that as a former Chancellor, he wants to make sure that his autumn statement is correct, especially given what Maria said, you know, the problems that we had in the last administration.
Well, let's see when we get a final decision. And, of course, we'll bring that to you if Rishi Sunak does decide to go to Sharm el-Sheikh, if only briefly, for the climate change conference. Let me show you some headlines, because there were dramatic developments at a migrant centre yesterday in Dover. The front page of The Times, a firebomb attack on migrants before the suspect commits suicide. This is the front page of The Express. Horror petrol bomb attack on migrant centre. And finally, in the Daily Mail, petrol bomber attacks migrant centre. This happened at one particular centre in Dover, and it has also meant that hundreds of migrants and asylum seekers who were waiting in that particular centre were moved to a different processing place about 20 miles away from Dover in Manston. Let's catch up with our correspondent, BBC News correspondent Simon Jones. He's down in Dover. What's been happening today, Simon, in terms of the numbers of people being moved from the processing centre, which was petrol bombed, to Manston, which is already suffering from overcrowding?
Well, in terms of numbers today, it's been pretty calm because it's actually quite windy out in the Channel, so we haven't seen any crossings. But yesterday, it was a very different story. We had 468 people make the crossing on 8 boats. Now, they were brought into port just down there at the Port of Dover by the lifeboat and the border force. That's an average of almost 60 people per boat. So that gives you an idea of the scale we're talking about in terms of these Channel crossings. On Saturday, almost 1,000 people made the journey. And yesterday there was that incident you were talking about where a man drove his car up to the initial processing centre here in Dover where people are landed. Now, he threw 2 or 3 incendiary devices into that area. He then drove his car to a nearby petrol station, and it's thought he took his own life. But obviously a terrifying experience for people on the site. We're told that 2 people suffered minor injuries. It's not clear whether they were migrants, whether they were border force staff, or whether indeed they were members of the MOD who oversee operations in the Channel. But that meant yesterday some 700 migrants who were here in Dover had to be moved as an emergency to the site at Manston. Now, that's around 20 miles from here. Now, the idea is that people are taken to Manston for around 24 to 48 hours for an initial processing, a search. People can claim asylum, they're given fresh clothing, they're given something to eat before being dispersed onto hotels or other accommodation. But the system simply has not been working in recent weeks. Manston was designed for 1,000 people to be processed within about 48 hours, at tops around 1,600. But now we're told there are currently 4,000 people on site, and there are real concerns about the conditions there. Last week, the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders visited, and he said he was simply shocked by what he found. He didn't feel the site was safe at all. There were simply too many people on that site. And as numbers continue, as they did yesterday, to go to that centre is only increasing the pressure there.
The local MP, Roger Gale, has said that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, had ignored pleas and requests and legal guidance to ease overcrowding by putting migrants up in hotels. Is that your understanding?
There's some real questions about what has happened here, because it certainly seems that the Home Office have simply run out of places to send people onto. There's been a lack of hotel accommodation being stood up. Now, it may be possibly because it's difficult now to find hotels or find areas where MPs are prepared to accept migrants being sent to hotels. But it's also been reported that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, basically decided not to stand up any new hotels. And so Roger Gale is suggesting perhaps that that was done either by her or her predecessor, Priti Patel, to almost create a hostile environment, to create the impression that actually if you arrive here, you won't get sent to a nice hotel. You may end up at Manston and end up spending quite a long time there. Now, in response, the Home Office say these claims are completely without foundation. They say that Suella Braverman has been working hard to find new accommodation, to deal with this situation, to come up with new ideas about this. But ultimately, there are lots of questions for her, and MPs, particularly Sir Roger Gale and Labour, want Suella Braverman to appear in the Commons today to answer some of those.
Simon Jones, thank you very much. Would you like to see Suella Braverman appear today in the Commons to answer all of these questions?
Well, I think Roger Gale has said he's put in for an urgent question, so it'll be up to the Speaker if that is allowed.
Sure, but I'm not asking about process, Maria. Do you want to see the Home Secretary in person come and answer questions, not just in response to the firebomb attack, but also the conditions at the Manston processing plant, where clearly there are serious issues of overcrowding and a backlog of asylum cases?
Well, I think ministers are taking it very seriously. The Immigration Minister went and visited over the weekend because he was so concerned about reports. But it goes, you know, this kind of story that they're refusing to move people on. I was involved as a minister previously when we had op pitting, when we were bringing Afghanistan refugees over. There isn't the capacity in the system, either in hotels or move on accommodation. And so when you're getting the vast numbers of people arriving illegally in small boats, the difficulty is how you look after those people. And that's the problem that the Home Secretary and the Home Office are facing.
We're just hearing now from Pippa Crerar at The Guardian that, in fact, the Home Secretary will appear this afternoon. She will appear in the Commons. She will answer questions not just about the situation that has unfolded over the last 2 days, but also about why she was forced to resign because of those security breaches. Will you wait to hear what she has to say, and will that satisfy you?
No. I mean, the situation is utterly appalling. We're talking about a situation here in Manston where people are developing MRSA and dysentery. I mean, this is how bad it is actually getting there. I mean, this is horrific. The fact that we're using hotels is a sign of the utter failure of the immigration system that we have. When I was last on your show, I spoke about the problems that we have with the Home Office that I see daily through my own constituency work. Do you know how long it takes to process an unaccompanied child in the UK? An average of 550 days. 550 days to process an unaccompanied child in the asylum process. And what are we actually seeing happening? If you look at the Home Affairs Select Committee report, we're seeing those children disappearing, sometimes permanently. So we have children disappearing permanently from our immigration system because the government can't get its act together, can't sort out the Home Office and can't process people in times. And with adults, it's only 1 day shorter, 449 days to process. The system is not fit for purpose. The Home Office is utterly failing everybody.
Is the system working in your mind, the asylum system?
Well, clearly the system's being overwhelmed at the moment by the sheer numbers of people who are arriving illegally in small boats.
The numbers haven't really changed.
Well, they have. They have significantly.
Well, hang on. I've got the numbers here. Arriving in small boats. Let's be clear about what we're talking about. 38,000 people have arrived, according to the official figures, in small boats this year. That compares with over about 28,500 in the whole of 2021 and 8,500 in the whole of 2020. But who has been in charge over this whole period? And the manifesto commitment that has been repeated constantly by Home Secretaries, whether it be Priti Patel or Suella Braverman, is we will grip this crisis. Have they gripped this crisis?
So some of the schemes they've tried to pull together, such as the Rwanda scheme, for example, every time that they try to deport people, they have legal challenges and people are physically taken off flights at the last moment. So every time the government tries to, Labour MPs vote against any of our measures. But absolutely, I think there's an acknowledgement across the board that the system is overwhelmed with the number of people entering illegally, and I'm hoping the Home Secretary, when she does come to the House of Commons this afternoon, will outline the plans that she has to address that.
We've heard from Yvette Cooper, and you have said the same. Yvette Cooper, being the Shadow Home Secretary, has said that she doesn't want to use hotel accommodation. So where would you house? Where would you house asylum seekers? Yeah, but where would you house them in the meantime?
What we've got to do is deal with the problem at roots. Now, we have a problem with smuggler gangs. We have a problem with people crossing, and they shouldn't be. But instead of trying to set up the Rwanda scheme, which, let's be honest, was all about generating headlines and trying to stir up their base for the local elections, let's deal with the problem seriously. Let's take the money that was going to be used in the Rwanda scheme. Let's look at giving it to 100 elite force within the National Crime Agency to work effectively and cooperate with national foreign intelligence to look at dealing with it at source. Let's deal with the problem before they even start to enter.
But what does that mean, dealing with it at source? Because they're saying that 80% of recent boat crossings have been filled with young men from Albania.
What we've got to do in terms of dealing with the illegal people smugglers, which is what allegedly, whether we believe it or not, is what the Rwanda scheme is like, is looking at crushing the criminal gangs. You can only do that effectively by having this elite force, by having a cell within the National Crime Agency, by working with foreign intelligence. The fact we had our previous Prime Minister saying that he didn't know whether the President of France was friend or foe isn't really paving the way for us to work effectively with our foreign counterparts.
All right, well,
we need a cross-country solution to this issue. We need to build those relations with other countries, and we need to take it seriously. This isn't about headlines. This is about taking a grown-up approach to dealing with a tricky problem.
Natasha, is one of the problems that the Home Secretary is compromised over the recent security breaches, which meant she had to resign before she was reappointed, and therefore has not been able to get a grip on this situation?
Partly. I mean, the issues are obviously related. They're probably not the same issue, I don't think. But obviously, she is facing fire on multiple fronts at the moment, and we've seen the newspapers over the weekend, briefing after briefing, about the Home Secretary and about her conduct. And, it doesn't take too many calls to be put in as journalists before you get someone who's willing to say, I don't think she's doing a very good job so far. But obviously, she, has only been in post for a few days. Getting a grip on...
Well, hang on.
Yeah, well, not for long, 6 weeks. I think, at the end of the day, she was also working with the Prime Minister, who was not, did not make immigration a priority. So she did face a tricky situation then. But yes, equally, she's not dealing with this situation. Well, I think it'd be great for her to come to the Commons and explain exactly what the government are doing and how they are going to stop this situation at Manston getting any worse.
I'm just going to show everyone this tweet by the BBC's chief political correspondent. This is a response from the Home Secretary to questions about the timeline in terms of when she made her accidental email to another MP and somebody she didn't mean to send an email to. She's responded saying, Home Secretary says that Home Office review found within the period between the 6th of September and 19th of October, I had sent official documents from my government email to my personal email address on 6 occasions. I think she then goes on to say, Braverman says information sent to MP did not contain any market-sensitive data, as all the data, we think it was relating to immigration, contained in the document was already in the public domain. Says review didn't find any other examples of official documents being sent externally. Does that satisfy you?
Well, given that her initial resignation letter made it sound like her sacking was, at worst, a technicality, the fact that she's now had to come out and explain herself really doesn't look good. The letter that she has sent outlining exactly what happened is, I think, 40 paragraphs long and goes into quite a lot of detail. And actually, the situation is quite a lot murkier than it appeared in her initial resignation letter. What I think is true is that this scandal is preventing her from actually acting as Home Secretary and looking at the problem of migrant crossings more broadly. We've had a very chaotic summer with a leadership contest and then a new Prime Minister and then another leadership contest and then some resignations and the Home Secretary is back. And while all of that is happening, there isn't time for anyone in office to actually deal with the fundamental problem.
Is too much political capital being spent on this, on Suella Braverman's personal situation?
Yeah, no, I think it is, to be honest. When you look at the previous ministers do make mistakes, and she owned up to it. She apologised. She resigned very quickly. When you look at someone like Peter Mandelson, who broke the rules twice, was reappointed by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, that there is precedence for this. And Rishi has seen her explanation, and he's confident in her explanation. And she does actually need to be allowed to get on with the job now.
Well, but the point is it her own situation that's preventing her doing it? Is she compromised? I mean, you mentioned Peter Mandelson as an example of someone else who was brought back into office, but this was 6 days after she was forced to resign. Is too much political capital being expended on Suella Braverman?
Well, I think, she's going to come to the House of Commons. We need to hear her explanation, but not so much her explanation, what she's going to do about this very urgent issue in Manston and the small boats issue. And the difference between us and Labour is Labour wants the people to be processed quicker. We actually want to stop the problem in the first place.
And I think that's what you need by working with foreign intelligence, which is why you need an elite cell within the National Crime Agency, which is why you could take the £120 million that have been wasted on the Rwanda scheme. You could put that money into dealing with this problem at source.
I think people need to know what the Labour Party's policy is.
Let Maria answer, so you have a conversation here.
What the Labour Party policy are. The Labour Party keen to see people who arrive here illegally deported?
When people have been processed, just to give you, go back in time a little bit, when people are processed, no, there was the Dublin arrangement that we had under the EU, which said when people pass through a country of safety, they're able to be sent back to that country
What would be your replacement
of safety.
for that?
You need to replace the Dublin arrangement. They've had 3 years, they've done nothing. We've had 5 people sent back to European countries, 5 people, because they've utterly failed to negotiate a new deal with other European countries.
Well, hang on, Maria, answer that question. Why have you failed to deport so few people?
But we have to try and put new systems in place, and every time we do, we're facing legal. Look at the Rwanda scheme, which was
not at all. It's Labour Party's policy for us to work out a deal with other European countries.
Don't talk over, because viewers can't actually hear what they're saying. We're going to move on. Let me just show you this headline in The Guardian. We're talking here about MPs backing plans for abortion clinic buffer zones, they are called, in England and Wales. It's an amendment to a public order bill which would make harassment of women by protesters a criminal offence. Earlier this month, MPs voted in favour of these nationwide buffer zones, and protesters found guilty of breaching 150-metre buffer zones around clinics would face up to 6 months in jail. The public order bill is now in the House of Lords. Maria, you voted against these buffer zones. Why?
Well, I just think the measures aren't proportionate to the issue at hand. There are already public sector protection orders that are in place that are being used around abortion clinics right now, particularly in places in London, that are working pretty well. And I just think if someone, 150 metres is quite a large area around an abortion clinic, and, there's the possibility of someone going up to a woman who may be upset or distressed, offering them, some comfort, that could then be accused of harassment and face 6 months in jail. So I think we need to look at what was actually proposed in the legislation rather than are you for or against buffer zones being a black and white argument.
Emma?
Well, I respect that this is a sensitive issue and it's an emotive issue that people have strong opinions about. But I did support the buffer zones because what the legislation actually talked about was that people weren't allowed to intimidate, harass or obstruct. And I think we should all agree that people shouldn't be intimidated, harassed or obstructed from accessing vital healthcare treatment, which is exactly what we have here. It's not saying people can't have passionately held views and that people can't express them and that free speech is in some way limited. What it's saying is that if women have to access this vital healthcare service, they should do so without facing intimidation, obstruction
Maria,
or harassment.
what do you say to that?
Absolutely, and that's why there is already legislation in place which allows the public space protection orders to be put in place, and they are being used.
But you voted specifically against these buffer zones that would stop people harassing people going into abortion clinics.
For me, the definition of what's harassment is open to interpretation. That's my concern. There's someone who's going up to maybe comfort someone who's upset or distressed, could be accused of harassment and could face 6 months in jail.
Rachel?
I find it quite disturbing that the Minister for Women voted in favour of the police crime and sentencing bill, which
I didn't actually.
Did you not?
I abstained on the third reading.
You tweeted in support of it, which...
Well, I abstained on third reading, so perhaps you need to check how I did actually vote.
I apologise, but you did tweet in support of it, and this is a government that wants to impose very strict protesting rules on protests that somebody might oppose to because they are too noisy or too inconvenient. Yet at a moment when women are trying to access vital healthcare and are at their most vulnerable, 150 metres is still giving people a chance to protest, a chance to make their voices heard, but not a chance to interfere with women accessing a vital medical service. And I think if we're talking about balance here, the balance there between people trying to access healthcare and people trying to make their voices heard in the vicinity but not interfering with that right is quite an important distinction to make.
Yeah, so I mean, as Emma said, this is quite a sensitive issue. And if you look at my track record of when I was a Minister for Women's Health previously, you know, I'm the Minister that's introduced the Women's Health Strategy, of which abortion sits in there. I was a Minister when telemedicine, so women can access abortion at home, was introduced. I was a Minister when Northern Ireland legislation came through Westminster to allow abortion. And I just think, just labelling someone because they vote a certain way on a certain vote as being anti-women or anti-choice, I think it's very, you know, I think, you know, we should be allowed to have a different view and be respected. I respect that Parliament voted to allow those buffer zones, and as a Minister I will have to uphold that decision, but I am allowed on these life matters to have a personal view without being, you know, criticised or told I can't do my job. And I think, you know, I think it's a sad day for politics if we're not allowed to have different views across the table.
Rachel?
I think everyone is entitled to their own views. The difference is that if you are in a position which is, the role of which is to protect and help women, opposing these buffer zones sends a message, unfortunately, whether you intend it or not, that at a moment when women are facing an incredibly challenging and emotionally difficult time, at that particular moment, you don't feel that they deserve perhaps the protection that in other circumstances...
That's not the case. I think the 6 months in jail is a huge sentence for someone. When we've got people protesting, the Just Stop Oil group, who are stopping people getting to hospital, stopping ambulances getting through, and literally they're offered cups of tea and coffee on the street. I think it's not a proportionate response.
Natasha?
I mean, and no one here on this panel is suggesting that women shouldn't get that vital access to medical care. I think we can all agree on that, if that's allowed to be collegiate on politics side. Oh, sorry, but yes, I think, you know, completely fair enough that you do respect all sides of the debate and all sides of the opinion on this, but equally, you know, upholding that, you know, vote that, you know, you've promised to uphold that, the vote in the House of Commons, you know, we should consider it sensitively.
I mean, can I just come back to you on something else? Because, Maria, you said you should be allowed to express your views on issues like this, on social issues. You were named as the Minister for Women by Rishi Sunak on Friday, but it has been criticised, as I'm sure you know. Annalisa Dodds, the Shadow Secretary for Women and Equalities, called your appointment deeply troubling, given your views on abortion. The Director of the Centre for Women's Justice said she was horrified that a clear opponent of abortion rights has been appointed Minister for Women. What would you say to both of them?
Well, I'd say look at my track record in delivering for women. You know, I was the Minister that introduced the first ever women's health strategy, which is a life course approach from a young age right through to old age in terms of promoting women's health. Abortion is in that women's health strategy in terms of provision. And I was a minister when things like telemedicine, home abortion was provided. So, you know, it's very easy to criticise, especially Annalisa Dodds, who cannot even define what a woman actually is most days, is then criticising me for one small aspect of that, which on life issues, there isn't a party political stance. Labour MPs voted against that legislation. Lib Dem MPs came out with concerns about it. This isn't a party political issue.
Do you agree with that, Emma?
I think these are deeply held personal beliefs, and I totally respect that. I think it's that separation of your personally deeply held beliefs and your role as a minister. And I think what we'd welcome, certainly, is that clarity of saying, well, these might be my personally held, deeply respected beliefs, but as a minister, abortion is a vital healthcare treatment. I respect the fact that Parliament voted in a cross-party way for this legislation. I don't think women should be harassed for it. And I think it's having sometimes, as all politicians we do, we separate sometimes our personal from our professional.
And I will have a duty to implement that.
Yeah, but I think Annalisa Dodds was referring in 2018 because you called for a debate on reducing the 24-week time limit for abortion. Do you understand why she might think that it was troubling that you now occupy a role that could influence that?
But there are women who also have quite strong pro-life views in society. And I think if we're going to drown out a debate on this and say that only those who support abortion can be ministers for women, can be involved in healthcare, I think that's pretty troubling that we can't have people with diverse views. You know, I accept that Parliament voted for this, and my role as a minister will be to implement that.
Right, well, that is an interesting point. I mean, does it mean that people with sincerely held beliefs on issues like abortion, as Maria said, there are a lot of pro-life campaigners and people who believe in pro-life, should they be precluded from holding office or high office?
I think it's fair to raise questions as to whether somebody who has a sincerely held belief on an issue will be able to act in an effective and neutral way on behalf of people who hold a different view. And to take, for example, late-term abortions and reducing the time limit, the vast majority of late-term abortions are wanted pregnancies which, due to either the risk of the mother's health or to fetal abnormalities, sadly cannot go ahead. And to sort of paint this as a sort of moral issue, when what is effectively what campaigners are asking for is for women to be forced to carry to term unviable pregnancies, compounding tragedy with additional tragedy, to say it's my sincerely held religious belief that they should have to do that. I think it is fair to ask questions as to whether that is a correct view for somebody in a position to actually do something about that.
Final word, Natasha?
Completely fair to ask questions, but I don't think we should, we should hold you for what you decide to do in office. Do you have any plans to raise this and to change it? Is that something that you'd look to do in office or not?
So, I mean, the buffer zone vote, for example, was voted on through Parliament. I have to uphold that
specifically on
decision
abortions, is that something that you would like to bring up again?
When I was led on the Women's Health Strategy, we devised Women's Health Strategy. Access to abortion is in there, and I'm committed to upholding that, whatever my personal view is. And I think people are pretty clear on that. That if that's what I have to do as a minister, then I've always been committed to doing that.
All right, let me just show you this in the Observer, because of course Rishi Sunak is new to the job of Prime Minister. Polling has been done. We're going to talk to Joe Twyman, co-founder and director of Delta Poll, in just a moment, but let me show you this headline. Voters choose Sunak's Tories over Labour to repair economy. New poll reveals his arrival in Downing Street is already helping to repair the party's reputation for financial management. Can you take us through some of the polling figures, Joe?
Well, this is one poll that was published in the Observer at the weekend. The latest poll that we have from Delta Poll shows that the situation is slightly more complicated than that. And indeed, if you take the polling as a whole, you see that among the established pollsters, Rishi Sunak has certainly improved the position of the government, his own personal ratings, and the Conservative Party's ratings in voting intention. But that's what you would expect historically. Historically speaking, you generally get a boost of between 3 and 6% in the Conservative vote when a new Conservative leader takes over. And we've had that across the polls this time around. We didn't get it with Liz Truss, but that was different for so many reasons. And when it comes to the issue of the economy, in the opinion poll, we do have the Conservatives just slightly ahead on who would be best to run the economy. But in Delta Poll, we have Labour just slightly ahead. But the overall story, despite the difference in overall result, the overall story is that, yes, the gap has closed. But I think it's really important to take these polls, all of these polls, in the context of very much a starting position. It's the benchmark against which Rishi Sunak will now be compared, because in a lot of cases, this is simply a reflection of the fact that the Rishi Sunak administration is new, at least new for the Conservatives, and he himself is relatively unknown. And so I think the polls now give us one picture, but that's the starting point. Over the next few weeks and months, we will get a really good sense of whether Rishi Sunak has been able to significantly change the fortunes of the government, and indeed could point to long-term trends in voting intention, or whether this is just a blip and a slight bump caused by the change in leadership.
Stay with us, Joe. What do you make of the initial polling that we've just had on Rishi Sunak arriving?
Nice start, isn't it, for Rishi to actually get a bounce, unlike his predecessor. But yes, it is it's just the start. Rishi must know that he has a huge mountain to climb. He must know that, looking at all of the polls taken together, that they are still very much behind, and he has a really long way to go. That's probably one of the reasons why we're told that they're not looking for an election anytime soon, because if they were, they would not be doing too well.
Right. I mean, there were many MPs in despair. Maria Caulfield was one of them under Liz Truss, despairing about their future. Are we saying that Conservative MPs think they might actually be in with a chance at the next election?
Well, I mean, Rishi is a new PM. He's obviously going to, I know he keeps banging on about the 2019 manifesto, but equally, he's now got his 2 years to make his stamp, to make his leadership known, and to, get the party back on track. It's been a tumultuous couple of weeks in British politics, never say never.
I mean, Labour were reportedly saying, or Keir Starmer's office, that we always believed that the support, the massive leap in support for the Labour Party and Keir Starmer was soft, as they put it. But it must be pretty galling that only a week ago Keir Starmer was leading all of the potential Conservative leadership candidates to make the best Prime Minister in the polls, and they were leading on almost every other metric.
Well, I think they're still leading by sort of 20 to 25 points. So it depends on the poll you look at. It's not a small lead, but crucially, what does the public, the general public, know Rishi Sunak for? They know him for the furlough scheme and for giving lots and lots of money out at a time of national crisis, which, by the way, was something that he didn't particularly want to do. But anyway, that's what he's associated with. It's all very well to say, oh, new Prime Minister, not Liz Truss. We feel sort of confident about him. How are they going to feel after the fiscal statement? How are they going to feel when it is public services being cut, taxes rising, benefits not rising to combat inflation? How are they going to feel when the really tough, eye-wateringly difficult, as Jeremy Hunt put it, decisions are actually being made? And it's not Dishy Rishi doling out the cash. It's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, multi-millionaire, telling you that, no, your taxes are going to have to rise to pay for this. I just don't think the economic lead is necessarily going to hold once he starts actually making the tough decisions.
I mean, you've only got a 2,500 majority, sorry to remind you, Maria, in Lewis in East Sussex. The Liberal Democrats are breathing down your neck. Do you think it's going to be very, very difficult to hold on to your seat next time?
Well, my seat's always been marginal. I had to overturn an 8,000 majority to win it in the first place in 2015, and I was down to lose it in 2017, down to lose it in 2019. So on the doorsteps at the weekend, it was like a light bulb, a switch. You know, the difference on the doorsteps in terms of...
From a low bar?
But people are relieved that, you know, they've got a Prime Minister who's said that mistakes have been made, who's going to be honest and open about the difficult decisions, and who actually is getting on and wants to get the country running again.
Well, we're going to talk about those difficult decisions in just a moment. Emma, what's happened? The lead is still there. Rachel is absolutely right for the Labour Party, but it has come down according to this poll, and it is only one poll.
Well, I think this is called the I'm not Liz Truss bounce, isn't it, really? I think that's what we're witnessing at the moment. Rishi Sunak's come out and gone, I'm not Liz Truss, and everyone's gone, oh, thank goodness. And so he's got some of his supporters back. But I think, you know, I think Rachel's absolutely right. I mean, the economy is in real difficulty. People are facing real hardship out there. There is problems with the cost of living. There's problems with the NHS. I mean, there's massive problems with adult social care. I mean, all of these problems are right there. And to think that the Conservatives, after 12 years of messing it up and getting us into this problem, are the ones to deliver the salvation and get us out of it, I think is absolute nonsense. And the public are going to start seeing that themselves.
Any response from you, Joe, before we let you go?
Well, what I would say is that the Conservatives have not been ahead in a published poll all year. You have to go back to December, the last time that happened. And the trend did accelerate under Liz Truss. It has now fallen back slightly. But as was said, the lead is still very, very large, and large enough to deliver a stonking majority for the Labour Party. The next few months will be crucial. We have everything from rising energy prices to potentially disruptions to energy supplies, and the NHS facing a difficult winter. If Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt can steer the Conservative government through that in what is perceived to be by the public effectively, then I think it will benefit them in the polls, and they'll be able to close that gap some more. If they cannot, then they face a very, very difficult time going into the May local elections next year.
Right, we're going to discuss one of the issues that is going to be looked at on November the 17th. Thank you very much to you, Joe Twyman. For those of you who've got good memories, you'll remember today was supposed to be the day of the fiscal statement for Jeremy Hunt. It was postponed by the incoming Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, until November the 17th. Having reversed almost all of the tax-cutting measures by Truss and Kwarteng, Jeremy Hunt has, as we've heard from the panel, still got to make some eye-watering decisions to fill the hole in the public finances, which are worse as a result of the mini-budget of Liz Truss. Now, one of the biggest decisions will be whether to keep something called the pensions triple lock and raise state pensions next year by the current rate of inflation, which is about 10%, as the Conservative manifesto promised. Is it fair and affordable to do so, Maria?
Well, I think Rishi said at Prime Minister's Questions last week that he wants to stand by the 2019 manifesto, and the triple lock was in there. And I think that pensioners didn't get that last year with the pandemic calculation in terms of wages were about 8%, which wasn't actually what was happening in reality. And I have been quite outspoken on this and call for, when Liz Truss was thinking about it, calling for the triple lock to stay.
Rachel, should it stay?
The triple lock is a mass wealth transfer from the working young to the retired, who are, on average, not everyone, but on average, the second wealthiest age cohort in society. You are more likely, as a pensioner, to be living in a millionaire household than you are to be living in poverty. You are nearly twice as likely as someone who is retired to be living in poverty as a child in this country. Now, the triple lock guarantees that the state pension rises in line with inflation or in line with earnings, or 2.5%, whichever is higher. That means that when wages drop, pensions go up. When inflation outpaces earnings, the triple lock goes up. It is not justifiable at a time when everyone is struggling to have pensions rise by 10% when earnings are only rising by sort of 5%. It was in the manifesto because, let's face it, older people tend to vote Conservative. It's basically a bribe, and it is entirely morally indefensible to keep it in these times.
You still want to keep the triple lock, Emma and Maria?
Yes, because I see there's lots of pensioners living in poverty in my constituency of Hull West and Hesel. I myself was out at the weekend and I see...
Then make it means tested.
And I see people really, really struggling there. I mean, the last Labour government did a huge amount to reduce pensioner poverty, and we will do a huge amount again, but there is still that desperate need. However, I do completely agree with Rachel about the hard time that younger people have, the massive increase in terms of mortgages and rent. I mean, and I can't remember the name of the person who ludicrously suggested that if they stop buying avocados and coffee, they'll magically be able to afford a new home.
Well,
I think
why not look at... I mean, if they're looking at everything, if everything is on the table, and this also to Maria, why isn't the pensions triple lock there?
Well, you know, we don't know what the decisions that the Chancellor
but
and
you don't
Prime
want them
Minister...
to take it off the table.
I mean, yeah, because it wasn't...
You do want them to take it off the table.
Well, you know, it was in our manifesto. And, you know, as Emma says, you know, in my surgeries, I've got some pensioners who, you know, that is their only source of income. Yeah. And, you know, there may be millionaires living who are pensioners in big properties, but that's not the experience in my constituency.
Well, hang on, let me just...
averages. It's about averages. It's not about all pensioners. It's about the fact that statistically that generation is wealthier than other generations. And the state pension is universal. But of course, there are lots of vulnerable pensioners. So look at targeted schemes to get wealth to the people in poverty, not to people who are sitting in multi-million-pound houses enjoying their defined benefit pensions that they got in the past, paid for at the expense of working young people.
How difficult would it be for the Conservatives to drop the pensions triple lock?
That's the problem. It would be incredibly difficult. There are so many Tory MPs who would be furious at this, not least because it is a manifesto promise. It is something that the Conservatives promised in 2019, and obviously Rishi Sunak repeatedly saying he's going to stick to those 2019 promises. You know, for him to row back on it now, also 5 weeks into his government, I don't think it's a fight that Conservatives are going to have at the moment. I think in the long term, it's obviously up for debate. Is this system fit for the 21st century, where we're seeing soaring inflation? It was not built for a time where we saw soaring inflation. It's completely fair to say there are MPs privately saying, look, we've got to look at this ahead of the next election. We've got to come up with a better system and a fairer system, and I think that's completely fair. But right now, will they scrap it? I think probably not.
Right. I mean, the Daily Telegraph headline, it's got Kate Andrews from The Spectator saying the pension triple lock has become impossible to defend. Vulnerable pensioners must be protected, but the 27% of retired people who are millionaires should share in the country's financial pain. Emma?
We also need to look at pension credit to go to the point that Rachel made. We should be looking at addressing that and raising that. And why is it that only one in four pensioners entitled to it don't actually claim it? But I think Natasha's absolutely right. The problem Rishi Sunak's got is he keeps claiming his mandate to be Prime Minister is based on the 2019 election. If he starts breaking promises from the 2019 election, then where can he claim his mandates come from? Because what we have in the Conservative Party is a party that's so ripped apart and focused on fighting itself. This is another issue that's going to rip it apart further. Having Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister hasn't dealt with the fact that many of the Conservative MPs dislike each other more than they dislike any of the opposition. That problem's not gone away. That's still there. And if he starts to sort of dig into this hole, I think he's going to find all those gaps opening back up.
All right, well, let's look at the other choices then that might be in front of them. If they keep the pensions triple lock and they go up next year with 10% and benefits also rise with inflation, that was also a commitment from Rishi Sunak. Where are you going to make the cuts?
Well, I think you know, I'm not going to comment on what the Chancellor may or may not do. That's why Rishi...
But you know that there are choices that will have to be made.
There will.
Right.
And
so where would you make them? Would it be education?
So the Chancellor is meeting with all new Secretaries of State and going through their departmental budgets.
And are you going through your department?
Well, I'm not the Secretary of State, but I'm sure the Secretary of State is. And of course, we've done that because inflation has been high, and that's naturally put a pressure on all departmental budgets already. But also, I think the Chancellor will also be looking at how he can bring some income in. So, you know, we need to wait and see what they say on November the 17th.
Well, that sounds like tax rises from Maria Caulfield, and obviously won't want to see cuts. Well, you said bringing money in. How would you do it?
Well, I mean, there's a range of options that can be looked at, and that's why it's important that the Chancellor is given time to go through that, so that on the November the 17th he's looked at the picture as a whole.
Because spending cuts would be very difficult too to departments like health or education or defence.
Yeah, and of course, but, you know, equally, you know, people in the Treasury openly admitting that borrowing, you know, which was the plan under the last Prime Minister, didn't work. It spooked the markets too much. We had Chancellor Philip Hammond saying yesterday borrowing is officially off the table now. It's got to be about cuts. And I think, you know, the Treasury, you know, are not really disputing this either. They are basically saying that it's got to be cuts. And there is a huge hole. And if you just look at the rhetoric that's come out from the Chancellor, from the Prime Minister about the economic situation, it's just got worse and worse. At first, it was a bit of an economic wobble, and now it's a full-blown economic crisis that we've got to deal with. And these are pretty huge decisions that the Chancellor is grappling with.
And we will hear, obviously, from him on November the 17th. Thank you to all of my guests. That's all for today. I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and the BBC iPlayer. Thank you.